Hello, bruvs. We're back with the After Night, the After Night, the After Midnight Ghost Book, a 1981 Franklin Watts publication. And we are on, I think it's story 14. Springtime at Kraznau. At the University of Kraznau, the spring comes late but beautifully. The climate, the climate in the foothills around Kraznau seems to hold its breath during March and April, as though willing time to stand still. If it snowed in February, then why not in March? If in March, then why not in April? If in April, then why not in May? Eventually, this stasis has to stop, and usually in late May, spring gains the upper hand. During the year I spent at Kraznau, the sheer freshness of the spring lasted all through June, at the latter end of which the students took their exams. As a visiting lecturer in English philology, I administered exams to my small group of students in one of the dingy rooms allocated to the English department. But students in the larger departments took their final exams in the rectorial hall. The rectorial hall was a magnificently Baroque room with chandeliers mounted on the walls were the coats of arms of the noble students at the University of Kraznau, founded 1609, the largest of which was that of Crown Prince Karel, who matriculated in 1694. The last coat of arms belonged to the Duke of Willamar, who left without a degree in 1927. The rectorial hall was at the top of a flight of stone steps leading up from the principal quadrangle, the rector's court. The broad flight of stairs was crowded with apprehensive students during much of June, but at other times it was almost deserted. The steps led only to the hall, and except for exams, the hall was used only for grand university occasions, like the reception of some dignitary, or a lecture by a new professor in classics, or graduation ceremonies. Whatever the great rectorial hall had been built for, it was now the ironically grand setting for a month-long scene of anxiety as the students struggled to introduce some kind of coherence into their new knowledge. I think most undergraduates feel a thrill of nervousness when the doors of the examination room open and they must enter, find a seat, then learn the worst and begin constructing their answers. Most undergraduates can cope with the anxiety and nervousness. Some find it a considerable ordeal. A very few cannot tolerate the strain. My own students that year at Kraznau bore up to my exams with good humor. I assured them that there would be no alarming surprises among the questions. I advised my advanced class to have a particular understanding of strong verbs, the great vowel shift, and Werner's law. Most of them took this sound advice and did well in their examinations, or completed high, as they would say. The English department staff was fairly evenly divided between men and women, a refreshing change from my home university, which I represent on the Council of the British Union of University Women. I got on fairly well with all the staff, but Ludmilla became a special friend, and we always had lunch together in the refectory. One day over tea with some dried lemon peel in it, she was telling me about another lecturer, Vaclav, who was about to have a monograph published on Piers Plowman. Then she said that for the next week she would have to help investigate, or invigilate. Is that how you say that? Sounds wrong. Invigilate examinations in the rectorial hall. As a visiting lecturer, I was not expected to take part in these duties, but Ludmilla had to do her stint even during examinations in other subjects. There is a table on a raised platform, but it is rather bad form to sit there or any other place while an examination is in progress, she said. I have received several pages of instructions about it, and we are to keep moving along about slowly among the rows of students. In fact, it is allowed to stand rather than always to walk, but that is the idea, you know. Can you meet me at the rectorial hall at lunchtime? I shall have to stay there until shortly after 1 o'clock in order to sign a statement saying that nothing untoward has occurred during the examination and that those who are to take up the examination scripts have arrived and have taken charge of the rectorial hall, or if something untoward has happened. I saw that Ludmilla was becoming enmeshed in a paragraph of some subsection of her instructions. I agreed to meet her at the rectorial hall during the next week. When I first arrived at Kraznau, the instructions in English had welcomed me warmly, if slightly defensively. I suppose they were afraid I would ferret out any little lapses in syntax and expose them to ridicule. In fact, I was inclined to be impressed by their fluency and general command of colloquial English. But Ludmilla, at our first meeting, had taken me warmly by the hand and had said, I am so happy to meet you. And then she had taken me on a tour of most of the university. We passed the clock tower, which she told me had been the gift of a certain nobleman in the 1630s. It was also she who pointed out the coat of arms in the rectorial hall of Crown Prince Carel and the Duke of Willamar. She said then that she had taken her turn in as an invigilator of examinations there for the past 3 years. It is very draughty, had told me. The windows do not fit very well against the frames. The lighting is quite good, at any rate, because then all the chandeliers are turned on. Almost 500 students can take their examinations here at one time. I have invigilated examinations in law, philosophy, and science. It is preferred that invigilators be taken from faculties other than the ones in which the examinations are. Let me read that sentence again. I have invigilated examinations in law, philosophy, and science. It is preferred that invigilators be taken from faculties other than the ones in which the examinations are. In that way, the invigilators remain disinterested, and there is no chance that they might help a student unfairly. On Monday of that week, I met Ludmilla at the door of the rectorial hall. Most of the students had left. The examinations committee had arrived with envelopes, string, and sealing wax, and that is sealing, not a ceiling, to take possession of the exam books. And Ludmilla had signed a statement, along with the other 7 invigilators, saying that the exam had been orderly and routine. She came forward from the clump of officials and greeted me with a cordial smile. I am ready for lunch, she announced emphatically. She was a solid but not stout person. She ate well, but she also fenced, swam, and played squash. Calories came and went without pause. At the refectory, she had large helpings of potatoes, stew, and bread. As always at lunch, we chatted about how we had spent our morning. I told her I had been marking some papers for my one class in literature. There were medical students today, she said. I have never had medical students before. It was so warm in the hall that we had to open some of the windows. Did you have to report that? I asked. No, she said. That doesn't count as an unusual incident. The eight of us agreed that it was not necessary to mention it. Ludmilla took a bite of bread. In a moment, she said, but you know, there was one odd thing. In a moment, she said, but you know, isn't that what I just read? But you know, there was one odd thing. A student asked to move to another seat, and since there was an empty seat nearby, I moved him to it. He seemed satisfied with the second seat, but I cannot imagine what was wrong with the first one. It looked like all the other seats. The bench was not loose. The desk was not uneven or difficult to write on. I didn't mention that on the statement at the end of the period. I could see she was little worried about it. She was a little worried about it. I thought it was nothing to worry about. The trivial bureauc- bureaucracy at the University of Kraznau has to be experienced to be believed. No, of course not, I said. I shouldn't think a thing like that would be worth mentioning. Students can be hypersensitive at exam time. He may have just felt like sitting somewhere else. I shrugged to show how inconsequential it probably was. The student did not tell me exactly why he wanted to move out. The student did not tell me exactly why he wanted to move out. He seemed quite anxious to change his seat. Well, I said, as long as he was marked present on the attendance sheet, the actual place where he sat probably doesn't matter. Oh, yes, Ludmilla said, finally smiling. I had just taken the attendance on my side of the room, seats 1 to 248, and therefore his seat did not really matter. I don't think it really mattered. No, I said. He seemed very worried, she said a moment later. Quite worried, in an odd way, as though he were afraid I might not allow him to move, as though it were of very great importance to him. Just at that moment, Dr. Bielski joined us. He was the university librarian and another particular friend of mine, because he was interested in improving the library's collection of English language books and wanted me to advise him on acquisitions. Dr. Bielski was ordinarily a very cheerful person, and today he was even more cheerful because he had scored some sort of obscure coup in the context of the library. Perhaps he had found another table for the reading room. He asked how Ludmilla was, and how I was, and how our colleague Wenzel was. Ludmilla mentioned her invigilating duties in the rectorial hall for the anatomy exam that morning, and Dr. Bielski's interest seemed out of all proportion. I wondered if he rather fancied Ludmilla. He was enthralled by the information about the windows, spellbound by the narrative of the student who wished to move. I met Ludmilla again on Tuesday, and as we walked towards the refectory, she told me that on the previous afternoon, another student, and that this morning a third student, had asked to move. The third time it had happened, she had realized that all three students had been sitting in the same seat. That morning, she had looked carefully at the seat to see what could be wrong with it. The desk and bench looked exactly like all the others. As she stooped down to look under the desk, she rested her hand on top of it. It was surprisingly cold to her touch. She felt the desk next to it and found it warm by comparison. There was no noticeable air current near this desk, in spite of the draftiness of other parts of the room. Thoroughly puzzled by this piece of furniture, Ludmilla sat down on the bench and rested her elbows on the desk. I felt terribly cold and nervous, rather anxious. I felt a kind of dread and always this inexplicable coldness, Ludmilla said. Ludmilla said. We had by now reached the refectory, where we took our place in the queue. Ludmilla took her duties seriously, but I could scarcely imagine her being really anxious or afraid. I had sometimes even been struck by her casual fearlessness. For example, there was the night of the storm. It was raining steer rods and a gale was blowing. We were sheltering in the doorway of the arts faculty quadrangle, waiting for it to clear up enough for us to walk home. There was a loud crash from a lamp standard which had blown over. Just when I was deciding to spend the night in my room, Ludmilla laughed. What are we waiting for? She said. We can only get wet, and we won't blow away, or not far. We'll always be stopped at the frontier. She laughed merrily and strode out into the rain and wind. In the circumstances, there was nothing I could do but follow her. It took us almost an hour to get home, and I was thoroughly exhausted at the end of it. We couldn't even talk because of the wind. When we reached my door, she just squeezed my hand and then went on to her own house. The next day, there was no wind at all. We had scarcely taken our trays and found a seat when Dr. Bielski appeared. He sat down beside Ludmilla and asked how the morning had gone in the rectorial hall. He kindly spoke in English for my benefit. Ludmilla told him about the strange bench and desk. I cannot explain how unpleasant it was, she said. I had a terrible feeling. I felt as though something horrible was about to happen. I felt as though the ceiling were going to fall on me, or as though the floor were going to give way under me. I jumped up from the desk immediately. No wonder those 3 students wanted to move. I know I should report this, but I don't know what to say. How can I explain it? I should like to see this desk and to touch it, said Dr. Bielski. May I come to the rectorial hall this afternoon? Yes, said Ludmilla, but you must leave when the examination begins. We finished our stew, and then we all 3 returned to the rectorial hall. It was unlocked, and Ludmilla took us in, switching on the electric chandeliers at our end of the hall. The seats had been laid for the afternoon's exams with a gray answer book and a sheet of blotting paper on each desk. Ludmilla took Dr. Bielski and me to a desk marked with the figures 187 on the top. It was 4 or 5 rows in from the center aisle and 1 or 2 seats in from the back wall of the hall and the great double doors by which we had entered. Just as Ludmilla had told us, it looked exactly like the adjoining seats 186 and 188, and to each side 176 and 197. Dr. Bielski placed the flat of his hand on seat 187, looked at it expectantly, and then looked away. He touched the next desk with the fingertips of his other hand. I also put one hand on 187 and the other on 176. I couldn't feel any difference in temperature. Even when we assured her that we could feel no difference, Ludmilla still declined to touch the desk again. When Dr. Bielski sat down on the bench of 187, Ludmilla turned away. You don't feel anything unusual, she asked. No, said Dr. Bielski. Nor do I admitted. Ludmilla seemed relieved but slightly annoyed. She naturally wanted us to understand what she had experienced. I even sat down at the desk, half hoping to have some peculiar sensation, but even autosuggestion could not make me feel any change in temperature. The other invigilators were arriving, and the rest of the lights were being turned on. In another few minutes, the students would be allowed in. The examination this afternoon is in endocrinology, Ludmilla said. as Dr. Bielski looked around the room, studying the windows and pillars, the floor, and the other seats. When the students came in, there was a rush of talking and footsteps. The expression on Dr. Bielski's face changed so suddenly that I instinctively looked around to where he seemed to be looking, but I could see nothing. He uttered an exclamation and said, "The desk is growing cold." Ludmilla and I both touched it, and it was colder than before, colder than the surrounding desks. Dr. Bielski looked thunderstruck. A student then approached to where we three were leaning upon the desk, as though engaged in an impromptu seance. She stopped a few feet away, and we slowly backed off from the desk. Before Ludmilla could say anything, the student sat down and began to arrange her pens and a ruler in the groove at the top of the desk. She suddenly stopped and looked up, frowning. Ludmilla stepped forward and asked, "Would you like to change to another seat?" Instead of answering, the student sprang up, swept her pens off the desk, and moved to the seat Ludmilla indicated. Dr. Bielski then tentatively sat down at the desk. He stayed there for almost a minute while Ludmilla and I watched. Then he quite deliberately got up. By this time, most of the students had taken their places. The seal on the question papers had been broken, and the invigilators were laying the papers on each desk, face down. "You must leave now," Ludmilla whispered to me. We left through the double doors just as the clocks were being taken away and the doors were about to swing shut. Outside on the marble landing, I wanted to ask Dr. Bielski about the desk. Before I could, he said, "Let us talk about this affair of the desk. I want to show you something. Come to my office in the library." As we walked through interconnecting courtyards to the library, Dr. Bielski told me about a manuscript he had cataloged. It was in the estate of a former student who died last year, leaving his books to the university library. God knows where he got it. It was a diary of a student who matriculated here in 1721. I have been trying to find out more about him off and on for much of this spring. His name was Bruno von Haradi. Dr. Bielski's office was a cramped little room reached by marble stairs, which steadily became less magnificent as we neared the upper floors. Here he showed me a well-preserved, leather-bound book full of neat but unreadable handwriting. It is an excellent example of a fluent, early 18th century hand, Dr. Bielski said. This student, von Haradi, may have been a great-great-great-great-grandfather or uncle of the man who bequested the diary to us. Probably more greats. I don't know how many. What interests me is this. And he flipped through the pages. "June of 1723, he said under his breath. "June, June! Here it is now, now." He was skimming the strange handwriting and slowly turning a few pages. "Yes, the 28th of June. You see, Haradi was still in Kraznau, although he was not taking examinations. Most of the other students had left for the summer, but von Haradi had not yet gone home for various reasons. He seems to have ordered some books which had not yet come, and also he had become enamored of a young woman in the town and was not eager to leave Kraznau on that account. Now so, Dr. Bielski paused. The medical examinations were under progress. Bruno von Haradi hears from his friend Wilhelm. Yes, here. I spoke to the Prussian Wilhelm this evening in the Little Goat, and he told me a strange tale. This afternoon, during his examination in Materia Medica in the rectorial hall, a student ran out before anyone could stop him. Right in the middle of the examination, he shouted something in English and was out of his seat and through the doors in a moment. Wilhelm says it was someone called Chashduik in the English nation. I said I didn't know that there was an English nation, as Kraznau has he said it was very small, and that they are all in the medical faculty. So this Chishudik ran from the room screaming. A second later, they heard a clatter on the great staircase and some muffled talking. Later, they learned that Chisduik had fallen down the stairs and broken his neck. He was as dead as a footstool. Wilhelm said he was a clumsy fool and probably tripped over his sword, which he insisted on wearing. By the time the others left the rectorial hall, the body had been taken away and there wasn't even any blood. Old Klinger apparently says that this kind of thing is not uncommon, and in his time, there have been 3 suicides from the bell tower. Bruder Loft was lustig seen wilder Frühling. War it? I will tell Maria this story. It will give her a good frisson. Again, no books today. The devil take the bookseller. Now, said Dr. Bielski, I have an intuition that these events are related. In about 1725, most medical faculty examinations were transferred from the rectorial hall back to the medical faculty. It is only quite recently that we have begun to use the rectorial hall again. I have been unable to discover why the examinations were moved in 1723, but 1725, but it might have been, Jesus, I'm getting tired here. But it might have been because the hall had a kind of, he searched for a word, a geist, a spirit of some sort. When I sat in that seat, a most indescribable feeling came upon me, a feeling of fear and dread and angst and great apprehension. I suspect it happens only when a medical examination is under progress. That is why the desk felt cold only when the students began to come in. There is something very strange about seat number 187. Dr. Bielski's manner was very reasoned and persuasive. I was inclined to think there might be something in what he said. The whole thing gave me a very eerie feeling for the rest of the day. I thought of the young English student Chadwick in 1723 falling down the great staircase and breaking his neck. He would have lain in a horrible, twisted heap at the bottom until someone had come and bundled the body off somewhere. And now, perhaps, a presence of some sort lingered about the scene of this event. I was expressibly glad that I was not invigilating exams in the rectorial hall. I was writing a few personal letters in my office when Ludmilla came in after the afternoon exams. She had a teapot in her hand, very full and very hot. I gathered from the way she held it. I got out some cups and saucers. Well, my friend, she said, I shall be very happy when these examinations are finished. She stirred some sugar into her tea and sat back in my easy chair. Very happy. I passed on to her the story Dr. Bielski had told me. She shuddered when I had finished and said I would not be surprised if that was true. There is something very unusual about that seat, number 187. And this afternoon, I thought the whole vicinity of it was rather sinister. I walked past it a few times in the course of my duties, and I found it quite unpleasant. I had little bumps on my skin, little bumps of apprehension. Goose pimples, I said. Ah, yes, goose pimples, Ludmilla said, each time I passed that seat. We drank our tea in silence for a while. Which exam is it tomorrow morning? I asked her. Materia medica, she said. I think it's medica. That's the one the English student was taking when he ran out. I said, yes, I know. The next morning, I unlocked my office door with the intention of parceling up some of my books to send back to England. I began taking some of the books off the shelves, but I kept thinking about the materia medica examination in the rectorial hall. Very soon, I found myself locking the door again and making my way toward the rector's court. I stood at the entrance of it, looking across to the great staircase. As I glanced at the other sides of the quadrangle, who should I see in the entrance at right angles to mine but Dr. Bielski? He saw me at the same moment, and I waved to him. We hurried towards each other and met midway on the old flagstones, diagonally opposite the great staircase. Dr. Bielski, I said, you know that the examination this morning is in materia medica? Yes, he said, I do. I'm afraid I suffer from great curiosity. I felt compelled to come to the rector's court, although I do not think I would like to go into the rectorial hall. Oh, man. I was about to tell him that it was against the rules anyway, when there was a loud noise as of a door slamming somewhere near us. We both looked round but could see nothing. The sound seemed to be coming from the staircase or the hall. But the big double doors were motionless. Again, the sound came again and again. Again, the sound came, and again we could see nothing. Now the slamming was continuous, as though a heavy door was blowing violently to and fro in the wind. In a moment, one of the big doors of the rectorial hall creaked open, and an angry invigilator stepped out. Stop that, the invigilator shouted at us and at the otherwise deserted quadrangle. He looked round sharply and stared at us. He smiled slightly and nodded, as though to exclude us from his angry outburst. He was still standing in the doorway, holding one of the double doors slightly ajar when the door was thrown open violently, and the invigilator pitched forward onto the stair landing. As he lay there, the second door opened wide, and we heard the sound of running feet. They seemed to be scuffling over stone, taking short, quick steps. Then I heard an uneasy sound, one I had not heard for many months. It was another English voice without a foreign accent. I can't do it. I cannot. Oh God, I can't do it, it said. The agony in the voice was indescribable. I can't do it. Oh God, I can't. The invigilator was lying curled up at the top of the steps with his arms round his head. He slowly slid down 2 or 3 steps and then clung to one of the massive stone balusters at the side of the great staircase. While the voice was still uttering its repeated cries, Dr. Bielski and I heard something soft bumping down the steps, interspersed with the metallic clatter. We looked at each other. It was Chadwick and his sword. The wail gradually died away, but the bumping continued. with its strange mixture of softness and clattering. In a moment, it too died away, and we felt a cold wind sweep through the rector's court. In another moment, there was an absolute silence, not even broken by the sound of breathing. Dr. Bielski and I gingerly approached the great staircase and edged up to where the invigilator was still lying. He looked up and saw us and loosened his grip on the baluster. After staring at us blankly for another moment, he said, "Something tried to push me down the steps. Something knocked me down and tried to push me down the steps." He very slowly gathered his feet under him and stood up. Ludmilla stepped out of the rectorial hall and came toward us. She asked what happened, and we tried to tell her. The other invigilator was rubbing his back between the shoulder blades. Ludmilla nodded at everything we told her. "I think," she said, "it is like a thunderstorm which is over. I noticed that seat number 187 is of a normal temperature. I think it is finished for this year." And then, almost in the same breath, she turned to the young invigilator and added, "We still have to write a report about this." Not a very good story, but oh well, that's that.